Welcome back to another episode of The Sweet Spot. This is John Sherman from the Four Foundations of Golf. And as always, I'm joined by.
Adam from Adam and Golf.
So today we have one of my favorite people in golf to talk to. I believe this is his third time on The Sweet Spot. We have Karl Morris, who is the co-author of some amazing books. It's a series called The Lost Art of Golf. He has a great podcast called The Mind Caddy. I think he's a kindred spirit in terms of how he thinks about golf, along with Adam and myself. So, Karl, welcome back to the Sweet Spot. We're excited to have you back on.
Oh, it's great to be back, John. I always enjoy these conversations. I'm coming up to the service medal now. I've been on that many times, I think.
Yeah, we're
Is it
not.
3 or 4?
I think it's three. I think it's three.
Yeah.
No. I'm sorry. This could be 4. We'll have to go back into the
I go on
into the
Carl's
record books.
podcast a few times. I know you have as well, John, so it all blurs into one for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I often find myself, this is a compliment to your coaching philosophy. I often find myself citing Karl when I'm talking to people. I'm like, oh, well, Karl Morris believes so, blah, 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 blah. So yeah, we enjoy talking to you. I love learning from you. And yeah, we'll see. We always drift into a bunch of topics. So we'll see where we go in this episode. But I guess we'll start with you talk to a lot of interesting people in the golf world. I'm sure your mind has changed over the years. So what's top of mind for you lately? Like, what have you been interested in or thinking about or talking about that might have been different from what you said 10 or 15 years ago? Anything come to mind?
I think the biggest one, John, is that I would guess when I first started out with this, as a lot of people in the sort of psychology field, there was a sort of overriding sense that you could control thought, that if you went through certain routines and rituals that you could control your thoughts and get in a certain state out on the golf course and things like that. And it all sounds great, this idea that you have these set things that you become in this ironclad mind Buddha like state, nothing's gonna affect you on the golf course. And unfortunately all those theories ran into that horrible thing called reality. And
Chaos.
and the reality of it is you guys have talked a lot about, that the game itself is chaotic, endlessly chaotic. But also, I think I've made decent strides with people getting to understand that the mind is that way, in the sense that your brain, your mind are gonna it generates thoughts like the heart pumps blood, and we're not going to stop that. This idea that we can control our thinking, I think, causes more problems than almost anything else. And I think when we start to accept that these things passing across the screen of our mind are just kind of bundles of energy, it's not so much about trying to change your thoughts that I think the progress can really occur. It's changing the relationship to the thoughts. So that, there's a big difference between realizing that you're having thoughts and then being able to think deliberately. And I think those, when you start getting more comfortable, I never ceases to amaze me the endless shit that my brain comes up with on a regular basis.
I say the same thing all the time. It's wild, right?
It's wild. Sometimes I think to myself, where the hell did that come from, and what made me think that?
Me too.
I'm getting a bit better at becoming a bit more comfortable with that and thinking, okay, it's just doing what it's designed to do, which is, trying to protect me. It's trying to be cautious about everything. Okay, let it settle down. Okay, right. What do I want to think about? What do I want to focus on? And what do I want to get done?
Is that in real life the brain's doing that, or in golf? I mean, it should happen in real life as well. Golf reflects real life.
But it's everything, Adam, isn't it? You sit in your car, and maybe your wife hasn't rung at the time that she said she would ring, and it starts, and then 5 minutes later, you're thinking about divorce proceedings, and you're thinking, which part of the house will you live in for 6 months when you split up, and all this kind of crap that you just come up with, and you just think, wow, it's unbelievable what a storyteller that the brain is. There's a great guy, you should try and get him on your podcast, called Chris Neubauer, who's talked an awful lot about this, that how, especially in the Western world, we give so much emphasis to thinking, and we put so much value to thinking, when actually thinking is great used in the right way, but most of the time it's just going to get us in trouble. It's going to make us unhappy. It's going to make us miserable, because that's what it does. But when you stop trying to resist your experience, I think that's a huge part of a breakthrough, whether it's getting the best out of your golf, or getting the best out of your life. And I think there's so many things out there that tell us we can sort of channel our experience and it's going to turn out in a certain way. When we stop resisting life, when we stop resisting our experience, I think golf and life takes on a better dimension.
Here's an interesting one, Carl. I know someone who claims that they don't have an internal dialogue. And I
Are they, are
remember,
they, are they,
Yeah.
well, this is the thing, I can't understand it, right? But I saw what is that? It's like a science journal. They've gone more towards poppy stuff now, but it said apparently something like 5% of people don't have an internal dialogue. And you click open the comments, and there are some people in there going, yeah, what? You guys speak to yourself?
Oh my God, how
I
peaceful that
know.
must
So
be.
apparently there are people walking around who are literal zombies. That's
Just
crazy.
not thinking.
Yeah.
my-
I've come across one person who says they don't have an internal dialogue. So that's very
but I
interesting.
bet that
Mine runs all the time.
I would be willing to bet that some of those people are saying to themselves, isn't it great that I've not got an internal dialogue?
Well, yeah, that's the thing. Like, if you have an internal dialogue, you literally can't imagine the opposite. You can't imagine turning it off. Interesting.
But
Weird.
I think the paradox of it all is, and this is so relevant to golf, the more we embrace the chaos, the more we realize that that's what our brain does, is generate thoughts. Paradoxically, things tend to settle down. You know, you've talked a lot about this, John, with your own game. The more you embrace the fact that, you know, you're a good player, but you can still top it. You're a good player and you can still hit it 50 yards right or chunk a chip or whatever. The more we embrace that chaos, the paradox kicks in, the more it settles down. And it's such an obvious one to go to, but I think that's why Scheffler is so far ahead at the moment, because he's very much got a perspective on the game and a perception of the game that when he goes out on the golf course, his brain isn't perceiving the game of golf as a threat. His brain is perceiving golf as an opportunity because he's at peace with whatever the game is going to throw at him.
Yeah, and even he gets frustrated too. Like I think there's clips of him at the Tour Championship recently slamming the bunker, and like he's not perfect. And something that I find comforting is when top level players admit in whether it's press conferences, podcasts, to not having perfect thoughts. And I know you've worked with major champions and some of the top players in the game, all the way through, I'm sure, beginner and quote unquote average players. So I'm not asking you to name names, but in your experience, peeling back the layers from these, all-time greats and big names, are they supremely confident and thinking positively all the time on the course when the pressure's on? Like, what's some of the crazier things you've heard?
Well, I think it was a classic press conference, wasn't it, with Scheffler at this year's Open. That was, and it just, I mean, all the press didn't know where to go, didn't know where the hell to go with it at first. You know,
Yeah,
when he sat there and he took his cap up and he sort of said, "Well, I don't
this
really
it.
know why. I don't really know why the hell I want to win this tournament so much, because if I do win it, I'll be happy for 10 or 15 minutes." And again, I think he's seen through the illusion in the sense that, you know, we have all in our lives achieved certain things that we thought would make us happy forever, like the house or the car or the wife or husband or whatever it is, the award, the qualification. And you know, if there's one thing that I would sort of say after all these years of doing this, maybe the biggest illusion that we all harbor is I'll be happy when.
I
I'll
was
be
just
happy.
gonna say, yeah, I noticed you had a podcast episode titled that, and that was in my notes to ask you. I love that term. I'll be happy when.
Yeah, I'll be happy when, and you can fill in the blanks basically. You know, you mentioned, I've been lucky to work with some guys who have won major tournaments, and you know, I've often told this story that, you know, one of those guys. If you think to yourself, well, as a golfer, what would you like to do? Which of the majors would you want to win? Well, you know, some of the guys on your side of the pond might pick the US Open, they might pick the Masters, but I would think a lot of people over this side would probably want to win the Open. Where would you want to win it? Well, you probably want to win it at St Andrews, I would imagine. How would you like to feel coming up the last? Well, how about if you have a 7-shot lead, so you can really take it all in, and you know, you go and win the Open, and surely that will make you happy for the rest of your life. You'll pull back the curtains every morning, and the rays of sunshine will appear, and you'll feel great. Well, a guy who did that, I remember seeing him a couple of weeks later, walked into his apartment in Spain. He was playing over in Spain. And, there was a palpable gloom in there. And we've laughed about this since that, life was just throwing at him what life throws at him. That, there were now decisions to make about the kid's education and where he was going to play and things like that. And, normal stuff that makes us challenged. But it had a big impact on me because I thought, my God, this guy has just done what I assume would be the ultimate that you could ever do in the game of golf. And the happiness hasn't even lasted a couple of weeks. And Scheffler reinforced it that it doesn't last that long. But here's the big thing then. So that the illusion is that something is going to make us happy in the future. We've almost got to just shatter that illusion first and then recreate the illusion that it's important to win the club championship or win the Open or get on tour or whatever it is. But we're doing it not through a sense of I'll be happy when. We're doing it more of a sense of what could I achieve and what am I capable of doing? And those are two very, very different things.
You can also set a new baseline for your expectations as well. Like I always hear the story of someone who won the lottery, won millions, and they were interviewed, and they're like, "Well, how is life now? You've won all this money." And he's like, "Well, I sit on the couch just like any of you, and I surf Netflix." But this time I have this dread and this feeling that I should be doing something more because I have all this money, but I don't know what to do. I know everybody listening is like, well, I would do this with it. I would do that. But at some point,
most
you gotta
lottery
stick
winners,
with your
like, their
thoughts.
lives get ruined, like, or at least in the
Funny, higher
American version
depression
of it.
rates.
Yeah.
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 Same with
That's proven time and time again, isn't it, in the lottery literature that, you're suddenly taken from one place where you've got a set of friends and you've got a job and you've got things to do and problems to solve each day. And then all of a sudden this thing happens that none of that's there anymore. And maybe the circle of friends isn't going to be what it is anymore. And, you go into another circle that you don't perhaps belong to. And, whilst I think it would be a nice problem to have to deal with, it's a cliche, but it's a cliche for a reason that actually being absorbed each day in becoming the best copywriter or the best surgeon or the best golfer or the best dentist or the best accountant or whatever. It's the quest to become the best at what you do that actually that's the real juice. That's where the energy comes from. It's not what we think it's going to give us at the end of it all. And I know, enjoy the journey and all the rest of it is a cliche. But there's an awful lot in that if you can get really clear about something and you think, do you know what? I'm going to give this everything, whether it's a business or a book or whatever it is. I think, you guys will have experienced this where the number of times I've talked to businessmen who've made a lot of money, and almost every one of them will say that the real great days were in the early days when they were just operating out of their bedroom with a computer, or, there was just two of them started the business and it was really tough. And those were the days that just gave them so much energy. And it's the same with the game of golf. And I think everybody, that's the beauty of it. I work with a lot of people in the sort of 50s who've made a few quid, who want to give golf a go and see what they're capable of. And what a fantastic sport it is that it allows us to do that, because you can have the best thoughts in the world, but if you come to me and say, I want to be a great footballer at 55 or a great baseball player at 55,
Ship
we've got
sailed, buddy.
challenges with that. But, you can still play some fantastic golf in your 50s and 60s, and setting out with that challenge and seeing what you're capable of. I think that's, the hero's journey, Joseph Campbell's theories. It's a wonderful thing to embark upon.
Yeah, we often, I know, butt up against this topic on so many episodes because it's like, very serious life and golf stuff. But I think I saw something recently. It was a study, like, and I think it was mostly centered on men. Like, it was pretty much said, like, well, how do you avoid depression in men? Like, go on a quest. Like what you
Yeah.
just said, like the quest is such a great thing because you're striving towards something and you're climbing and you're working. And we get messages all the time, and I'm sure you do too, with I want to be X handicap, I want to win my club championship, I want to do this. And I love all that stuff too. Like, I'm trying to achieve things, but yeah, I've noticed they come and go, and they're exciting for a while, but then it wears off. I think that's I think when Scheffler said that, everyone kind of got angry at him because like a lot of people knew. They're like, yeah, he's kind of telling the truth too, and no one wanted to like admit it out loud that
It was
someone
it,
like as rich and accomplished at him as him and so young could be like, is this all there is? But I'm still doing it anyway. He's like admitting that I'm addicted to this still and I still want to do it, but then I get this emptiness afterwards also. And then of course he won the open and like absolutely looked like he was on cloud nine, and then he's on to the next one.
yeah. I think Nick Faldo, I heard him on commentary, and he wasn't having it at all. He was really struggling with the concept of what Scheffler was saying. You know, it's each to his own. But back to our kind of brain, when our brain is involved in solving a problem, that's when thinking can be used effectively. You know, and if you just love solving the problem of golf, whether it's hitting the middle of the club more often, or whether it's just improving your ground contact with your wedges or whatever. They're all seemingly insignificant things that, to your point, John, actually make us happy if we're just involved in it for the sake of solving these problems. And guess what? When we get good at solving problems like hitting the middle of the club more often and interacting with the ground better with our wedges, the numbers at the end of the round tend to add up a little bit better. And then some of the things that you think you wanted tend to fall into place. And, that's where the great beauty about golf is we're never going to run out of problems to solve, are we?
No, I think it's one of the greatest problem solving activities. And I say this over and over again. I do feel bad for non golfers who didn't catch the bug like we all did, and everyone listening to this, because, yeah, I mean, fortunately, physically, you can play the game for a long time and you never solve it. And that comes with some great heartache and embarrassment, but also comes with some great satisfaction and friendship and adventures and all that good stuff. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah, it doesn't matter
One
how
thing
good you get. Doesn't
yeah,
matter how good you
you
get
can't
this
master
game.
it.
The
Um,
problem is just shifting from day to day. I on the topic of chasing the carrot, I suppose the idea that I think lots of people might not be able to understand it from Scheffler's point of view, but I remember going through it as a junior. My first goal was I'll be happy when I get a handicap. That means that I'm a real golfer. And then I got my first handicap, and then it was like, well, I want to be single figures now because I got down pretty fast. I got down to 15 in the first year, and I was like, I want to be single figures. Then I get there, all elation for a while. Now it's like, well, the best junior at the course is 5 handicap. Maybe I can get to that. And it just continued on, and it actually got worse for me. Like the enjoyment level got worse because I just stacked on pressure. So, for people listening, it doesn't necessarily get more enjoyable the better you get.
I think the big problem, Adam, is when, you're alluding to it. I certainly went through this in my golfing playing days, was that I think when we get to a point where we've maybe had a little bit of success and the ego likes that success, and you get pats on the back and you get adulation for doing whatever. And then there's a subtle shift takes place, I think, where the ego attaches your value as a person to the score on a card. And then I think then we go down into dangerous territory where you're linking, as Raymond Pryor would say, you're linking yourself to your craft, whereby, you go out and play golf and you shoot 68, you're a good person. You shoot 74, you're a bad person. And that's then when you get into that dreadful situation where the golf course really, to your brain is full on alert all the time to search out threats and protect you from the threat. And when we are perceiving the environment called golf as a threat, you think, what are we hardwired to do when we perceive threat? We're hardwired to either run away from something, to fight something, or to freeze. And not, as far as I'm aware, none of those responses are that useful for golf. We can channel those responses perhaps in other sports. And I think that, again, after just John's question at the beginning, after all these years wrestling with this perennial problem of why do we not transfer skills from the range to the golf course, my simple answer to that now is your brain is either perceiving the golf course as a threat or as an opportunity. And it's not an all or nothing dichotomy, but I think you can either try and spend your lifetime trying to cure all the symptoms of the threat, work on breathing and things like that. And it all has its part to play. But to me, the big prize is, can you shift how the game of golf is occurring to your brain? And there's various things that you can look at to do that. But when that shift takes place, and again, using Scheffler as an example, the golf course is pure opportunity to his brain. He's not perceiving threat. He might be playing difficult courses and challenging situations, but fundamentally, his threat level is reduced. And when your threat level reduces, then the swing that you've cultivated, your hand-eye coordination, your mind-body system, whatever it is, then it can function closer to your true potential. And I think we've missed the boat with a lot of it, real. I think we've spent a lot of time trying to work on mental game techniques. As I say, have the part to play, but it's understanding how your brain is perceiving the activity called golf that we've got to drill deeper into to sort of, I think, make real progress.
Yeah, I don't think I mean, as you're saying all of that, I'm thinking to myself, like, man, I know this like logically and theoretically, and I'm trying to help other people with this. And I still struggle with that too, because we had this conversation with Josh Nichols a few weeks ago where we were talking about like bedrock stuff versus like more superficial, like breathing. But like if your bedrock, if how you approach the game and what your value system with golf is off, then as you said, and I've felt this very acutely at times, you step on the golf course and it's a threat to you, and you can breathe all you want and it's only going to help a little bit, but the score and the results are a threat to you and what you feel about yourself. And like you just, I understand a lot of people who listen to the show like desperately want to get better, and like you can never solve that. I'll give a quick analogy. This is kind of silly, but it came to my head. I've been learning a lot about YouTube and how to get better at YouTube. It's like, something I'm interested in lately. And I listened to an interview with Mr. Beast, who is the best in the world at it. And he said years later, after all of this, he needs to lock himself in a room and keep saying to himself, it's all about the title and the thumbnail. It's all about the title and the thumbnail. And he's at the top of his game and he needs to remind himself of something so basic. And I think golfers forget this all the time, myself included, that yeah, if you veer off into this extreme where you're like this score addict and results addict, then yeah, like you step on the course and it's a threat to you and it sucks.
Yeah. And I think within that, John, then the opportunity of it is, when we strip everything away and we think, well, what is this thing that we do called golf? At the end of the day, we're walking around a big field, hitting a piece of rubber with an implement.
It's silly.
That is the objective reality. What we choose it to mean is a story that we create. Now, the big opportunity for that is that if we're making all of this up, and we are, because everybody's reality is different, if we're making it up, whatever you're currently making up, if that's not allowing you to achieve what you want, you do have an opportunity to make up a different story and make up a different narrative about what it all means to you. And again, as crazy as this sounds, that, when you can start to change the narrative and you can start to say to your brain, brain, whatever happens out there today, I am going to be okay. You don't need to protect me. As silly as that sounds, talking to the brain at that level, to me, is far more effective than trying to drill down into all these myriad of techniques, which, can be effective. We're not saying don't explore breathing and routines and things like that. But if you've not got a perspective on the game and a perception of the game that changes that or reduces that threat level, and I think that's the key. You don't have to eliminate the threat. You just need to reduce the threat to get closer to your true capability.
Yeah. And I think when you pair that with very good on-course techniques. So one I actually want to ask you about was you gave Louis Oosthuizen, I think this was over a decade ago, a red dot on a golf ball. Explain that one to us.
Oh God, it's 15 years now, believe it or not.
To the best you can remember it.
Well, if we go back to what we said at the beginning, that we can't control our thoughts, and we understand that, what we can do is we can appreciate that thoughts will pass around and pass through us randomly. But what we can do is choose to think deliberately. We can have a difference between random thoughts and deliberate thinking. Now, ultimately, what do we need to do from an attentional perspective to execute a good round of golf? Well, we need to bring our attention to a specific problem to solve for a better player between 59 and 74 times in 5.5 to 6 hours. And what we do know, the way that the brain works, is that we respond pretty well to signals and triggers. So, you don't have to think about putting your foot on the brake when you see a red light. You're hardwired to do that. So what we did with Louis, because he talked about really struggling to bring his attention to the shots at hand, we came up with this idea. It was serendipitous, really. He was sat in an office in Manchester where his then manager Chubby Chandler was at ISM, and we talked about how he would want to be when he played a particular golf shot, and he described it. And I said, if that state of mind had a color, what would it be? And he looked at me. It was the daftest question he'd ever heard. And I said, no. I said, "God, what would it be?" And he said, red, I guess. And I tell you, but no word of a lie. Maybe this was what had triggered him. On the desk was a red Sharpie pen, and he had his glove with him. And he said, "So what you're saying to me? Maybe if I put a red dot on the glove, when I look at that red dot, that could be a trigger for me to actually just go into that particular shot in that particular moment." So that was where the plan was hatched, and the deal when he went to St Andrews, because he never actually made a cut in a major prior to that. He'd actually been a very good player and, won tournaments, but never made a cut in a major. And the deal for the week was that on any shot, once you've got the data of the shot, you look at the dot, and then the dot is a signal to just ask a couple of questions about what the shot looks like and how it's going to feel in the swing to produce that shot. So it was just a trigger mechanism, basically, to just get him into each shot as a separate problem to solve.
I suppose you're creating a kind of Pavlov's dogs
Absolutely.
situation there where, I guess it's quite hard to do that in golf because every time we look out there, out at our target, it's a different scenario. So it's, there's still a flag and there's greens, but there's new dangers. There might be water on the left, nothing on the right, or vice versa, maybe wind. So it can be kind of hard to get into that Pavlov's dog's automatic state. Whereas when you give that red dot, I suppose it makes things a little bit more consistent.
I think the thing is, other sports tend to have more overt triggers, don't they? In football, the referee will blow a whistle, and that's a signal for the game to start. He'll blow a whistle when there's been a foul, and the game stops, and so on. I'm sure it's the same in baseball and basketball. It's kind of like the game gives us triggers to get in and out of the game, whereas golf, you're just out there for this 5-6 hour period, and there's no overt trigger to actually bring your attention to the particular shot in the moment. So I think that's something that folks can play around with. Is just think about golf differently in the sense that if you decided you were going to play golf, and whatever your level of handicap is, that you're going to have between 60 and 90 separate puzzles to solve. Everybody says play one shot at a time. The brain doesn't latch onto that. It's not interesting enough, that. But if you say you've got 60, 70, 80 puzzles to solve every time that you play, we like puzzles, we like crosswords, we like Sudoku, we like being engaged in that. And it's a great frame. Again, it reduces threat. But then you could have a trigger like the dot to just go into the puzzle. And once that puzzle's over, you're then out of it until the next puzzle comes along.
Yeah, I think it's a basic accountability exercise that everyone can put themselves through because, as we said earlier, like golf is chaos, whether that's the chaos in our mind or what we're seeing on the course. And when you create these like very simple tasks, you're like, oh, I can do that.
Yeah.
Like you're
Yeah.
gonna go play in your club championship qualifier. Like, could you look on that red dot every time and like just think about your target or something? Like, yeah, I can do that. I don't know if I could win the club championship, but I know I could do that thing. And that thing I think is different for each player based on, I mean, Louis is obviously like an incredible talent. Like, he can execute shots that only people can dream about. But it's interesting to know that even someone at his level needed something so simple to attach himself to. And yeah, I think we can get creative with that stuff and it could change. But I try to find these little things for myself to hold myself accountable to. And yeah, like you work on that perspective stuff, the bigger stuff to bring you on the course. And then when you're on the course, you have to have these little tricks and accountability things to kind of, deal with the noise. Cause yeah, there's just so much noise out there.
The beauty of that, John, is that then it becomes a game within the game. You've got a little bit more agency over, as you said, that you could go out there with the aim of looking at a dot on a glove every shot for 60, 70, 80 times. That the brain can get its head around that a bit more than, oh, can I win the club championship? Can I qualify for the tour school? And again, things like that, this big picture of reducing threat, that's a little micro way of reducing the threat on each particular shot. I always tell this story at the seminars, though, because the dot at the time, it got quite a bit of press in its day, and there was this was before the sort of internet really revolution, and it was in newspapers and things like that. But a lot of people covered the idea about the red dot. They didn't really understand what was going on. But after the red dot thing with Louis, I started to see quite a few people at different places with white gloves and red dots on the glove. And it's a true experience. I saw this guy on it. He was a pro-am, and I walked up to this guy, and he'd got a dot on his glove. And I looked at him and I said, "Oh, you've got a dot on your glove." And he looked down at it. He said, "Yeah." He said, "I've no idea what it's all about." He said, "But I thought I'd give it a go anyway."
Well, yeah, that's the difference. Like, you could make the argument, why was it effective with Louis? Is like, well, he kind of came up with the idea, sort of like you goaded him into that idea. And if someone else just like takes it, it means nothing to them. Like, you have to find your own red dot, right?
And I think that's hopefully the benefit of, your show and sharing these ideas. That I heard a great one a while ago from a guy called Ralph Bauer. I don't know whether you've had Ralph on.
Yeah, we've had Ralph
him
on.
yeah.
Yeah, he's great coach.
Great coach. And Ralph told me that he played for a few years. He played a lot of golf with Mo Norman. And I mean, he said he probably didn't realize at the time as a kid playing with Mo Norman just what he was experiencing in the presence of greatness. But Ralph told me this story. He said he was playing with Mo one day, and he said to Mo, he said, "Mo, certain holes," he said, "when I look up," he said, "on this golf course, I feel really uncomfortable." And apparently Mo just turned around in the way that Mo would have done. And he said, "Well, don't look up." In a way, there's genius in that, because what Mo must have had an understanding of, that on certain holes, when we look up and we look out there and there's water left and there's out of bounds right, the perception of the task is incredibly threatening. To thread a ball at 250 yards in terms of that vista out there is threatening. Now, I've had quite a bit of success with players about, in those situations when certain holes feel uncomfortable, and everybody will relate to this listening, when everybody's got certain holes at the home course that they feel perhaps less comfortable with. It's only the perception of what's out there that's making you feel uncomfortable. So if the perception is making you feel uncomfortable, change the perception of the task. So if the task on that hole that you don't like was actually, can I imagine 2 alignment sticks 20 feet in front of me, and I've got to thread the ball through that, or I've got to knock it over a spot just in front of me, the perception of that task then changes the level of threat. Now, again, that's not something you'd want to use on every single hole, on every single course, but it's just something that you can have in your toolkit for those 2, 3, 4 holes where you feel uncomfortable for whatever reason because of your perception.
I'll be
I
honest,
actually
Carl.
I have a very extreme example of this. Later on in life, it only happens when I'm elevated. I realize that if I go to an elevated driving range, I get like vertigo symptoms and I can't complete my swing. And it's only happened 3 times on golf courses where I've been lucky enough to play a course where I'm on a cliff overlooking the water. So I was playing a course like this in February 3 or 4 times, and I literally could not hit my driver because the water was so close to me. My brain, like, I just couldn't complete my swing. And the first round, I just like topped the ball into the water, like just total meltdown. And by the final round, I didn't look up. As Mo said, I couldn't look up. I'm like, in my head, I'm like, don't look. Because the second you look, a shot that should be routine for you, all of a sudden my brain is like, oh my God, it is the strangest experience I've ever had in my life. Because I literally felt like the ocean was pulling me into the water. And the only way I could even clear the water was to literally not look up. So that was an extreme example of this working.
But that's a perfect example, John, there you've just described, that how that situation, your brain, for what, for your individual brain is
That was
perceiving it.
horrible. Yeah.
Yeah, it's awful. So, you've utilized your golfing knowledge to change the task. You've changed the task. Instead of the hole being out there, you stay looking down at something just in front of you, and then your brain says, okay, we can deal with this. And I think this whole subject of changing the perception of the task. Again, I think not enough coaches look at that. Or the standard fare that you get in most of the psychology books is, aim at the smallest possible target, because if you don't hit the bullseye, you'll hit the board. Well, aiming at the smallest possible target is great if it works for you. And
Yeah.
and for some people it really does, and it's really effective.
Have I ever
For
told
other
you about
people,
my study on that, Carl?
sorry?
Have I ever told you about my little study on that?
No, no,
Yeah,
no.
I did. I did that. I had a driving range with poles at the back, and I asked people, to either aim at a single pole or I gave them a width, hit between three poles, and I was just measuring, how far offline the ball was going. And as you rightly said, I found that some people perform better with that single pole as their target, but a lot of people perform better with it was like 50-50. And
Yeah,
so for me, it was actually a trick I was using to try and get lessons. I'd walk up to people and I'd say, "Hey, can you just take part in this study, just 20 balls?" And then at the end, I'd give them my card. But I was like, "Oh, this is a good opportunity to collect data as well." And the data I found went completely against what I thought was going to happen. I was always taught aim small, miss small. And I was like, well, this data isn't showing that. It's
yeah.
50-50. So, yeah. Sorry to
Uh,
interrupt.
No, no, it's, I mean, great reinforcement of, I've said to players that what you need to do is become what I call an attention detective. You need to become a little bit like Sherlock Holmes and just really explore your own experience of where your attention needs to be to get the best out of yourself. One of the guys I worked with for a long time, Laurie Cantor, who did well, has done well the last few years on the European Tour, DP World Tour. A big change for him was, just like you, Adam, he'd been taught that, aim at really small targets. So he was trying to aim at leaves on the trees and things like that. But that just tightened him up. When we started talking about hitting channels, this idea that you could create a huge channel off the tee and shape it into the channel, well, that was really liberating for him. For somebody else, that would probably be deadly and that wouldn't work for them. And this is where I think there's just such an adventure for coaches going forward in terms of going from coaching. You've got to develop skill, which is clearly massively important. But I think the real big frontier in the future is coaches who can then get players to access that skill when they really want it on the golf course.
Is
I love
a
what you said, attention detective. That's a great phrase because yeah, I think it's different for each part of the game. So like for putting, I think of like songs in my head. For my driver, I love big targets and thinking about, oh my God, I have so much room out there to hit this like high little fade. I don't really think in small targets. And you just try and experiment over the years to see what prevents you from being the most psychotic and anxious and calm over it. That's how you become your attention detective, is like you're thinking about, because I think a lot of golfers just default to the same thing over and over again, whether that's thinking about their swing or the small target, and you've got to change it from time to time to see sometimes the same thing doesn't work all the time either.
Yeah.
That's what drives me crazy about the game.
And I think that's where there is a bit of a danger, John, with routines, in the idea that, if you do the same thing over and over again, repeat the same things, there's some validity in that. But I think, as you say, going back to the attention detective thing, that, I'll have certain players who will, let's say putting, for instance, that, they were from short range, that their attention is on very different targets, right to left, left to right. We talk about with putting, and this was from a sort of bit of work I did with Izzy Justice about, reducing the brain activity by being really clear on what your target is. And we talk about having a basket of targets, like a toolkit of targets that you go out on the golf course with, and you use your own particular target focus for areas that are beneficial to you. And that's what, to Adam's point then, this is the great beauty of technology. We can test all this stuff out. We can use TrackMan or whatever to just test out. And I think that's where coaches we're so indoctrinated to think all of the answers are just in positions in the golf swing. But I think there's just a massive world of opportunity with attentional focus.
So, Carl, as you know, I dedicated a big part of my book to attentional focus, and I actually in there I said that this chapter could make a whole coaching philosophy in itself. If you wanted to, you could literally just test locuses of attention with people. And some of the things that I've done in lessons with people is, I look at, say, for example, chipping. I did a little mini study. It was classed as a game for the people who were in it. They didn't realize they were being studied because you didn't want the Hawthorne effect. But I would change the goal of a chip shot. So the first time it would be, right, you have to get it as close as you can to the target. And then I'm measuring, in terms of strokes gained, how close they were to the target. And then I changed it. I put a little hula hoop, a little ring, very, very thin wire, so it didn't affect the shot. And I placed it, or I allowed them to place it where they wanted to land the ball. So they had to visualize landing the ball and then it rolling out. Interestingly, for the vast majority of people, that completely screwed them up. They were stubbing chips, blading chips, just by thinking about the landing zone. Now, that doesn't happen for everybody. Some people improve with that. But it's a little test that you can do, right? Let's focus on the landing zone versus let's focus on the end result. And you often see this on the course. Players will be relatively good chippers of the ball, and then they'll come to a tricky shot. So obviously they're going to perform worse on a tricky shot, but sometimes they completely mess that up. That's where their yip or their stub comes from, because they start to focus so much on the landing zone because it becomes more important. And so just being aware of these things, when I know a chip shot has a very important landing zone. Say, for example, anything short of the green is all rough and it's just going to swallow it up. I know that my last thought should be the end result because I know that's what works for me. Another example of this I did was internal or external result focus versus external process. So I asked beginners, they were high handicaps, to chip over a bunker. So it's kind of a scary shot. Pin was cut short. And I asked them to either focus on the flight of the shot, so they're trying to get the ball up and landing in a certain area, or I asked them to focus on brushing the grass. So they had to, rate their focus at the end of a shot. How focused were they on the actual thing we were trying to? And while it wasn't a perfect science, because our brain will still have some of the target in there, I was able to increase the amount of focus on a given area. And what I found was, again, when these beginners were focusing on the result where they wanted to land it, they actually started stubbing and hitting shots in the bunker. Whereas when they focused on brushing the grass, they performed better. This is almost 3 different types of focus here: the end result, the landing zone, or even the brushing of the grass. And then you go even more internal, you can start to focus on weight on left side or something like that. I actually did that study and I found they perform worse with that as well. So these are all tests. Like I can look on a population level which one's going to perform better for people. I can then correlate that with handicap level, but ultimately test these things for yourself.
Just on that point, that probably the most influential book I've ever read was a book called The Principles of Effortless Power. And it was written by a guy called Peter Ralston. And it's got nothing to do with golf whatsoever, but everything to do with golf, in the sense that he talked about, it's fascinating. He talked about, because he was a guy, I can't remember what his discipline was, whether it was judo or karate or whatever, but he was the first non-Asian to win this massive games in China, and world-renowned martial artist. And he talked about how in martial arts that they would train in the dojo, they would train in the gym. And he referenced that in terms of training movement, most of it was done, first of all, in slow motion to sort of embody new movement, which I think, again, that's a whole different subject in terms of changing movement patterns. But I think that's a big one for golf, that we don't utilize that enough, of actually trying to feel movement in the winters, doing it slowly. The point I'm getting to circuitously was that he said that in battle, when he was in a fight, what he would do, he talked about, he settled his attention on what he called the 1 point. And the 1 point for him was, and folks at home can feel this, they call it the dantian or the hara, which is like a spot just below your tummy button. It's like the center point of your body. And he said he focused his conscious attention on the dantian, the hara, the 1 point. And he beautifully described it in the book. And he said he felt that when his attention was settled in that one place, all movement that he practiced in the dojo emanated and flowed as a result of his attention being settled in that one place. And I became fascinated by this idea of the 1 point. And if you transfer that into golf, then you think about it, that we're swinging a golf club or a putter or whatever for, what is it, 1 second, 1.2, 1.3 seconds. But as you've alluded to, Adam, that 1.2 seconds, our attention can go to so many places in that 1 or 1.2 seconds. And I think, again, that is why most golfers don't transfer the skills from the range to the golf course, because they don't understand the concept of the 1 point. And what you're talking about, hopefully we're discussing here, is to have that fundamental premise. Can I hold my attention in one place for the duration of the activity called golf swing? And it won't be one thing. It won't be just the dantian like Ralston was talking about. There'll be different things for golf. But I think that should be the holy grail for coaches and players, is to get really clear on what that individual 1 point in various points of the game is.
Yeah, my one thing is the intermediate target. So just like we were talking with Mo Norman, I learned this very, very early. I was watching a golf.com video or golf channel video, something like that. And it was Billy Andrade. I don't know if you remember him, but he was talking about how he got this from Nicholas. But he was saying, yeah, I set up, I look at the target, I bring it back to an intermediate target, and then I create a bubble around myself.
Yeah.
And I went out and tried that and played my best golf ever. And, like most things, it doesn't last forever. But that stuck with me. And I feel like that really helps me. So whenever I'm feeling pressured, or almost every single shot I hit, to be honest, my last focus is a feeling that I'm on my driving range mat.
Yeah.
On a driving range. Everything out there doesn't exist for me. It's just me and the driving range mat and my intermediate target. And then I usually focus on something like strike quality, but I'm in my own bubble. I'm not trying to control the outside of the bubble.
Yeah. It's Hal Sutton,
Yeah. Be the right club today.
when Tiger was all dominant. And Hal talks about the concept, he called it shrinking the world. He said, if you get drawn into the idea of beating Tiger Woods, that's just too big. You're out into the big picture of the world. Beating Tiger Woods was just too big a problem. But for him, shrinking the world, to what you said, I think he talked about something similar, that he would just get obsessed with a spot just in front of the golf ball. And his job was to set the ball out over that spot, to the left of the spot or to the right of the spot. So that was his 1 point that shrunk his world, that made it manageable. Again, back to what we said before, that was reducing the threat level for his brain, that actually allowed him to access the great skills that he.
Yeah, what are the simple things that you can hold yourself accountable to, playing one of the most terrifying golf courses in the world with arguably the best to ever do it in his prime?
Yeah. Because that's too big a problem, John, and it beats
Yeah, exactly.
Beating Tiger
it's
Woods
overwhelming.
It's
too
overwhelming. It's too big. It's too
Well,
big.
you think of most amateur golfers and they say, well, I'm really inconsistent. And then you dig into their thoughts. I've done this several times. I'm like, well, what were you thinking over that shot? And they'll have one chip shot where they're thinking, well, this was a funky lie. I was trying to hit the ground in a certain place. Next chip shot, they're like, well, I had to land it there, so my brain was focused on the landing zone. Next chip shot, they're like, oh, it was a pretty clear shot. I was just thinking about where it ended and where it was rolling. Next chip shot, they're thinking of weight on the left. The locus of attention is all over the place.
All over the place.
And our movements are attached to our locus of attention. Whatever you think will dictate the motion to a certain extent. I've seen huge changes in motion and mechanics just from where their attention is placed. For example, the chipping motion over a bunker. When they're thinking of getting a high shot over a bunker, landing onto a flag, their weight goes back, they start to scoop it. You see that more often. Whereas when you ask them to focus on brushing the ground in the right place, they stay more stable, get a better technique in general. So yeah, people
What's
don't
the
understand how
acronym?
our intent can
There's an
manifest itself
acronym.
in mechanics.
There's an acronym in Scotland when you're in between the green and the bunker. Something is like a funny acronym. Is like not in the bunker yet. Like they call it. I forgot the name of it. All the caddies in Scotland refer to it like when you have that shot over a pot bunker to get it on the green. 90% of the time, the golfer hits it into the bunker, and they have like an acronym for it. Be like, oh yeah, that's just not in the bunker yet.
Yeah. Scottish caddies have a lot of acronyms for a lot of different things.
Yeah,
The
yeah.
nitby. That's
That
why
might
not
be it.
not
Yeah,
in the
that's it.
bunker.
That's it. Not in the bunker yet. That's it.
Mm.
Excellent, excellent memory there. I want to get to AI, Karl. We were talking about this before we hit record. Before this episode ends, I have AI John, so I'm interested to see what's
I
going
am
on with
AI
your
guy. I'm
Adam is
actually
an
off
AI.
somewhere else right now.
I just deactivated AI John because I was scared of it. But tell me about AI Karl.
Yeah, it's a bit weird, John, when you hear it for the first time. I see it for the first time. Basically, I've got this app called the Mind Caddy, which we've had for 4 or 5 years now, and I'm quite proud of it. Really, it's kind of all my life's work in there, and various sort of modules, training modules, and things like that. A while ago, Ben, who's the sort of tech guy on it, he said we can create the AI version of you. And I said, what do you mean? He said, well, basically everything you've ever done or said or written and all the books and everything, we just feed it all into AI, and then it'll just be you to all intents and purposes. So we did all of this. And he said, just ask it a couple of questions. And I asked it a question, and it was like, Jesus, I would have probably said that.
Yeah, yeah.
And I said, that's exactly what I'd have said. He said, well, what else did you expect? It's only just been fed with all your stuff. Yeah, the worrying thing with the AI, a couple of people, including my wife, have said it's actually better than the original. My wife said, yeah, the difference with the AI, it actually asks me questions.
Yeah, yeah, it has a natural rapport. I did the same exact thing, and I uploaded everything, even audio, so you could talk with the AI and have a conversation with it. I released it like 15 or 20 people were using it, and they're like, "Wow, this thing's quite good." Mackenzie Hughes, the tour player I work with, he usually texts me. He's like, "Hey, can you talk?" And usually I'm around, and I couldn't talk. I'm like, "Oh, go talk to AI John." He had a phone conversation with the AI for
Yeah.
10 minutes, and I listened to it afterwards. He's like, "You know what? It was pretty good. It sounded like you. It was fairly helpful." I'm like, so I'm still not sure what to do with this thing. I temporarily deactivated it. I see some errors with it. You can train it to get better, but I do see this as like an interesting future for coaching in general, that if you have someone who, like Adam or you, Karl, who you respect their work, you have questions for them, being like, we get, all of us, I'm sure, get questions all day via email, social media, and you can ask these questions. Yeah, it gives pretty good answers if you
Yeah.
refine it properly. So I think it kind of weirded me out. So I'm sitting on it for now. I'm not sure what to do with it, but I had a similar experience where I was like, this is interesting.
But we kind of went all in with it, really, because I thought, well, with the best will in the world, not everybody's going to be able to come over and see me personally,
Yeah,
and
exactly. Yeah.
the finance and all the rest of it. But certainly for the performance side of the game, John, I think if you feel as though somebody's ideas and philosophy align with your own, I think to have a tool like that, like we've got in the Mind Caddy app, you basically got your own personal performance coach with you, and the more questions and the better questions you ask it, the more refined and personalized it becomes to you.
Yeah. There's so many. We don't have time to get all existential here about it, but I was thinking about it a lot, and I never like released it to a wider audience. I only had 15 or 20 people kind of testing, and most of the feedback was positive. But my head was like, do I charge for this? It's based on millions of words I've written and all my hard work, and I don't want it to, dilute that. So I had some like kind of I don't know if they were ethical slash moral questions that I was asking myself about it, but I think eventually a lot of stuff is going to go this way. Whereas you said, like, if you have someone who is a coach, like coaching is not scalable, right?
Mm,
You can't
yeah.
scale your time. You can't have 50 separate coaching sessions with people. Obviously, working with you directly would be the best result, I still believe, but yeah, it is. I see a lot of possibilities with it. I'm not so sold on the golf swing stuff yet, but in
No.
terms of like a dialogue and getting people to think rationally and asking good questions and going back and forth, like there's definitely value there.
Yeah, I mean, I'm biased, obviously, with that. I think on the swing side of things, I don't really see a replacement for
Yeah,
the personal touch and the dynamics around. Even with a golf swing, we need to find out what golf means to somebody, how often, all the things, how often they play, and the reactions on the course. But I think the performance side of things, as I say, hopefully, when you use the app, you can get involved in it in a way that it does help you stabilize the things that you're putting your attention on.
yeah, that's interesting. So you've got it in the app. There's like a section where someone could chat with you. Adam, what are your thoughts on this?
My brain's gone off into like the swing instruction side of it, and yeah, I mean, we did a podcast a couple of weeks ago about, I suppose, my value as a coach when I'm there, because part of me says, well, everybody has the information these days, so why are they not implementing it? And I'll often get a person in a lesson, and it's just like, okay, you have the information, and then 5 minutes later they're implementing it. So we went through a list of things that I do. I'm just trying to go through that list mentally and seeing what AI couldn't do of that. And I mean, we could argue that, yeah, it wouldn't be able to do a lot of the personal stuff, but have you chatted with ChatGPT these days? I mean, it's
It's pretty
pretty
good.
human-like
I
right
mean,
now.
to be fully transparent, I use AI a lot to help me with my content now. It
Yeah.
has all my existing content. It helps me come up with different ways to say the same thing, which is what I think coaching really is, and provide different examples that I might not think of. It makes mistakes. It's not perfect, but there's no question it's not helpful anymore. When I first started using Chat GPT, when it first came out, I used it for like a week and I'm like, this sucks. I'm like, this is totally overhyped. And then over the last 6 to 12 months between like GPT-4, the O3 reasoning, and now 5, I'm like, yeah, this is, it helps me refine my thinking on certain things. It's great for research. Um, yeah, I'm sure plenty of people listening to this podcast are using it in their daily life with work or even personal things. It's crazy.
Yeah, on the technical side, I wouldn't trust it. Yeah, I've done loads of, questions in there, oh, hey, you're hitting the shot fat, what would you do? And then it gives a list of things, and some of them are good, but some of them you'd say that's going to hurt a lot of players if they try to do that. Not physically, but it's going to run them into problems. So I don't think it's there on the technical side yet. I've even put mathematical stuff in there, like, okay, if the face is closed by 2 degrees with a driver at 240 yards, how far offline is it going to go? And it gets it way off. It gives you a confident answer, but it gets it way off.
But I think to what we've talked about tonight, to me, the AI would need to ask you, what is your intention on this shot? And where is your attention during the shot to really give a valid answer for that individual? And that's where I think at the moment, at this stage, being with you is going to be far superior than trying to work on your golf swing on.
Yeah, and it
Well,
depends what it's fed with as well. If it's fed with
that's the
all your
difference.
information,
Yes.
for your stuff, I'm sure it's going to have a very positive effect. In saying what you would say, I'm sure if I fed it my practice manual book and then it asked for I shouldn't give people this idea. Now. Asked for a practice plan, it would come up with a pretty good practice plan as well.
Well, that's the difference. If it starts with good information, it could, and constraints, it could give very good answers. If you just ask generic stuff, if I went on ChatGPT now and asked, "Oh, I've got a slice, how do I fix it?" It's just it's trained on Reddit responses. It's trained on Google, search results and websites. A lot of that's absolute garbage, right?
Yeah.
So it's going to draw from like an endless supply of golf information and give you the same regurgitated nonsense. Now, again, if we took Adam's coaching style and fed it with the constraints and said so you could only access this information and give the answer, it would give a far, far, far better response.
Yeah.
I just don't know. I think one thing, uh, we're going to get way off track here, but the legality of what it's trained on and using it one day is like, well, it kind of sucked everyone's information and you didn't give it permission. I'm just really wondering what the lawsuit situation is going to be over the next like 5 years. Because like the software I used validated my identity. I had to provide all types of proof that I was the owner of the information, and the company validated it. And again, I'm trusting them at their word. It was pretty well regarded that it's keeping it on a separate server and all that stuff. But I had to go through a lot of hoops to prove that I was the owner of the information, so I could train this model. Versus like again, generic Chat GPT is look what it's trained on. I think a quarter of it is Reddit. And Reddit, I don't know if people spend time on Reddit. It's just a bunch of opinions from people on forums. So like the output can be wild sometimes.
Carl, what kind of things have you asked your AI when testing it? And you're like, because you mentioned, okay, I asked it this and it came out with this answer. Can you give an example of that?
Yeah, it would be things like if I'm struggling with the short game, poor contact, what sort of things should I practice? Things like then if I improve my technique, how should I train better to take that practice out on the golf course? Asking it specific questions about feeling certain things at certain points in the round. So, and it's pretty good at coming up with what I would hope would be useful ways of then moving forward and trying to find some solutions for that.
On that topic, while we got real Carl here, what I assume you're right.
Allegedly, that's an
Allegedly,
assumption.
yeah. You
Yeah.
could do video. You could do video
This is how
too.
good is it?
You could have video too. You have video Carl. I had the voice John. You could have video as well. It's
Yeah.
not as good as
Yeah,
the
I've seen
voice, but
that.
it's interesting.
I've seen that. It's scary. I was watching a YouTube channel the other day that was about AI, and then I just noticed it took about 7 minutes of watching
Yeah,
it to
you're like,
see
this
that
person
her
isn't
hair
real.
was going weird. I was like, that was going a little unnaturally. And then you click in the description and it says, yeah, this is an AI channel. It's actually an AI presenter as well.
Oh, we're
And you see
doomed.
in the comments, people didn't realize it. It's already at that level. But Carl, my question to you was, with the transference thing, what are some kind of tips and tricks for training that help us transfer to the course? Because I know that's a huge issue for a lot of people.
That's two podcasts that we've got,
I
in
know.
all
Give
that
it
Sorry,
to
I'll
us
give
podcast.
in
you
the
10
10
minutes
minutes we
to
have
answer it.
left.
One thing that this sounds really quirky, but I found it really beneficial for players is you start off with the metaphor that to get the best out of your golf, you've almost got to become two personalities in the sense that you've got to be the engineer and the artist. So the engineer, using Formula One as an example, and the engineer would, they would look at the engine in the garage and make sure everything's as it should be. And then you go out on the track and Lewis Hamilton's thinking about, he's the driver, he's reacting to what's in front of him. So this idea of a kind of almost split personality to become a good golfer. Then, and this is a bit weird how it's worked, I've actually had players then, and it's a kind of spatial anchoring kind of scenario, literally wear different coloured hats depending on what they're doing. So the blue hat, you would be, right, I'm very much into a training mindset now. I'm working on whatever I'm working on in my swing, whatever skills I'm trying to do, and I work on that in a certain location. I change the colour of the hat to blue or green or whatever, knock yourself out. And the hat, metaphorically, now you're changing into that person who is going to be playing one shot at a time, into creating the shots and things like that. And it just seems to be this spatial reference of the different coloured hats seems to be having some real benefit for players in creating that switch from, because it is a switch of mindset, isn't it? You're changing from one mindset to another. And there's a whole bunch of different things that you should be doing when you're wearing one hat as opposed to when you're wearing a different coloured hat.
Something I've found success with is with a super analytical player, if their head is just full of junk, I've often asked them, or I've given them kind of backstory of, well, remember what golf originally was. It was a guy with a stone and a stick whacking it around a field. And I say, imagine this is your stick and that on the ground is a stone, what would it be like just to whack it like a farmer? No thinking of anything. And I've seen some really good success with that when people just tap into this instinctive part of them. So I'll have to get a bunch of farmers' hats now and get them to
You
wear
could
them.
look like that. You ever see that Speed Golf Rob guy on
Yeah,
Instagram? Like
yeah,
that,
yeah.
he is a riot. That guy, but it looks like what he looks like when he's on the course demonstrating. He looks like a Neanderthal. It's hilarious.
But I think at the very least change locations with when you're switching from one to another. When you're switching into Jon the golfer as opposed to Jon the engineer or the trainer, Adam the golfer, something that just gives your brain a signal. Now we've changed over. We've gone into playing mode as opposed to being. Our brains get stuck. So many golfers just get stuck in training mode. They get stuck in analysis mode, and they don't give themselves permission to switch over to that.
Or worse, they just don't even know that the two worlds are
Yeah.
different. Like they
Yeah,
just start saying
absolutely.
Yeah.
unfortunately, my dad is the perfect example of this because he took up golf later in life, but he was just like, why am I hitting the ball all over the place on the course? I was on the range for 4 hours and hitting it great. And I was just like, really? Like, you don't notice the difference between these two things? So he's like, I just don't get it. Because he was so used to like everything being like kind of more straightforward in life. And I'm like, this game might not be for you. He just couldn't wrap his, and that was, one of my, being his son, one of my problems for years, not understanding that I was a great player on the range and a total mess on the course is probably the most common question we still get.
Yeah.
I would say from people.
One of
Why?
But I
mistake.
think
Why?
you know,
Why is it different?
I know we're in our own kind of echo chamber here where we're kind of reinforcing what we all believe because we think similar things. But I think, coaching has got to take a long, hard look at itself and sort of let's start being more honest about it. And as a coach, yes, it's wonderful to study the golf machine and yes, look at all that, look at as much technical stuff and gain all that knowledge. I think every young coach should go and explore all those avenues. But you're doing a massive disservice to people if you don't explain that way of thinking will not allow you to play the best golf that you can play. And it doesn't mean that we're not decrying technique. We're not saying it's wrong. We're actually getting a clear understanding, and then you get into things like, for the vast majority of people, if you're going to try and change fundamental movement patterns, realize what you're signing up for. That is a hell of a lot of work to change fundamental movement patterns. But that, I'm not just blowing smoke here. That's why, stuff that, you guys talk about and hopefully I talk about, can you present the face open? Can you present it closed? Can you hit it too high? All these things where you're actually making micro adjustments to what the golf club is doing. That is where most people, if there's an improvement to be made, that's the massive opportunity. It's not trying to move your body through space like Adam Scott does. That's not going to be a realistic possibility for the vast majority of people. And we just need to be honest about that.
Yeah, one of the mistakes that I continually have to remind myself and my pupils of this. When people do online practice plan designs and lessons with me, I draw them up. It's a pretty big plan, and it includes technical training. So we look at their motion and we say, well, look, these are your goals. Say it's to reduce fat shots. And so these are the things in your movement that you can train that can help you reduce those fat shots. So that is part of it. But I constantly have to remind the people, because I sometimes have people come back and they say, oh yeah, I was trying to do that movement on the golf course. I'm like, no, that's not where you do it. You do it in training. You're supposed to do that on the range, and you're supposed to drill it until it becomes more of a natural part of your swing. But when you're playing, I want you thinking of simple stuff like, where you're striking on the face or brushing the ground in the right place. So I'm having to constantly remind people, and because we're in our own echo chamber. Jon and I are always talking about this stuff. So I forget that sometimes that people don't understand of the, what do you call it, the technician and the artist. I forget that some people don't realize that. And I also assume that when people come to me, they know that because I wrote that stuff in my book as well. So yeah, having to constantly remind people of that. And even, in my plans, I'm doing a bridging of the gap as well, because it's very difficult to go from complete technician to artist.
Yeah.
So I go through these things like, okay, well, here's your technical work. And then the next stage along is here's the play work. So what you talked about, hit toe, hit heel, hit more high, hit low. I got more specific drills than that. Then there's the calibration side, which is okay, still keeping it instinctive, keeping it tool based, but now you're going for what you want. Then we have a testing phase. So this is coming up the pre-tournament, and the testing phase is things like where should your locus of tension be for chip shots? Where should it be for full shots? Should you be thinking out of the target? Should you be thinking of a mechanical thing, or should you be thinking of brushing the grass? We test this stuff. And then finally, we do a transference phase, which is let's play a game now. Let's have targets out there and then see if you can implement the stuff that you've been taught. See if you can keep it on simple things. See if you can keep your locus of attention in the right place when there's a score game. And so that's might be my kind of route of, bridging the gap at each step of the way there. But yeah, for those people listening, it's okay to have that technical stuff. I can think some super complicated things when I'm practicing, but I can also turn it off very quickly and the reason why I can do that is because I hear the story of Tiger doing that. This talk is split personality. I hear that Tiger was great at that. In fact, I think it was you who told me in a university lecture before when I was 18 years old. You came in and you told us about that stuff. I was like, this is brilliant. He's going from super technical, but he can also turn it off and play instinctively. So yeah.
That makes me feel really old. That
Yeah. Side note, Karl lectured to Adam 24 years ago or whatever it was.
He's an old man.
Well, I know you have a hard stop here, so I want to be respectful of your time, Karl. Where can everyone find AI Karl? Where do they get this thing?
If they do a search for Mind Caddy, it'll come up. But the website, John, is mindcaddy.golf, and then my own website for coaches and anybody sort of wanting to explore working together is themindfactor.com.
All right. Well, thank you again for coming on. I often think the best communicators or the best coaches are the best communicators with the best concepts. And you have all of those things. I love your concepts. I always enjoy, you've got a different perspective on things. The way you say things will often trigger a light bulb in my head. So it's always great talking with you and getting new ideas, and hopefully for our listeners as well.
Thanks, John. Really, Adam, and really enjoyed it. Thank you.
All right, Adam, where can everyone find all your light bulbs?
I suppose the ones that are relevant to this conversation is practice manual. I don't know if you can see it there, but yeah, Amazon.com or co.uk or wherever you are. John, where can people find your information?
You can go to John Sherman Golf on YouTube. Maybe I'll release my AI again. It's dormant right now, but that's a TBD in the future. Anyways, thanks for everyone for listening, your questions and your feedback, and we'll see you next time with a new episode.